There is something strange about a piano that nobody plays. It just sits there, quiet, taking up space in the corner of a room like it knows it has been forgotten. The keys go yellow at the edges. A thin layer of dust settles on top. And if you walk past it every single day, after a while, you stop even seeing it. That is exactly what happened in one ordinary family's home in a small town in the American Midwest. A second-hand upright piano had been pushed against the living room wall, right between a bookshelf and a window that let in the afternoon light. It had been there for almost 3 years, and in those 3 years, it had been played seriously by exactly nobody. The mother of the family, a warm, soft-spoken woman named Claire, had bought it with the best of intentions. She had always believed that music was good for children, not in a pushy way. She was not the type of parent who schedules every hour of her kids' lives. She simply felt deep in her heart that if her children had a piano in the house, something good would come of it. Maybe they would find a hobby. Maybe they would learn patience. Maybe they would discover a part of themselves they didn't know existed. So she saved up, found a decent used piano through a local listing, had it moved into the living room on a rainy Saturday morning, and waited. Her oldest child, a 14-year-old boy named Thomas, agreed to try lessons first. He was a good-natured kid, the kind who said yes to things just to make his mother happy. He went to 4 lessons, maybe 5. Then one afternoon he came home, dropped his bag by the door, and told Claire very politely that the piano was just not for him. He never touched it again. Her middle child, a 12-year-old girl named Lily, lasted a little longer. She actually enjoyed it at first. She practiced a few beginner songs, learned where the notes were, and could play a simple tune well enough that Claire would stop whatever she was doing in the kitchen just to listen. But then school got busier. Friends got more interesting. And the piano, with all its demands for daily practice and focused attention, quietly lost the competition. Lily stopped going to lessons sometime in November. By December, she had moved on entirely. Claire's husband, Daniel, was a quiet, practical man who worked long hours and came home tired most evenings. He wasn't musical at all. But sometimes, on weekends, he would walk past the piano, pause, and tap out a few random notes with one finger. Just curious, just wondering. Then he would shake his head with a small smile, as if to say, "Asterisk, not me, asterisk," and walk into the kitchen to make coffee. So there it sat, the piano, unchosen, a little lonely, if a piece of furniture can be called that. And then there was Noah. Noah was 8 years old, the youngest of the 3 children. He was small for his age, with big brown eyes and a habit of going very quiet in rooms full of noise. He was not the kind of child who demanded attention. He didn't throw fits or beg for things or make himself the center of every conversation. He just watched and listened and noticed things that other people walked right past. Nobody really thought to ask Noah if he wanted piano lessons. He was only 8. Claire figured she would wait until he was a little older, a little more ready. She had already watched 2 children try and walk away. She wasn't in a hurry to see a third do the same thing. But here is the thing about Noah that his family didn't fully understand yet. He had already started, not in any formal way. He hadn't opened a book or watched a tutorial, or asked anyone to teach him. He had simply begun spending time with the piano on his own terms. Every evening, after dinner, when the rest of the family drifted off to the TV, or their phones or their homework, Noah would wander into the living room. He would sit on the bench, sometimes sideways, sometimes with his legs dangling, because they didn't quite reach the floor, and he would press one key at a time. Just one, then wait. Then another. His mother noticed it first, though she didn't say anything for a while. She would pass the doorway and see him there, head slightly tilted, listening to each note fade into silence before he moved to the next one. He wasn't playing music, not yet. He was doing something that looked more like a conversation. like he was introducing himself to each sound, one at a time, waiting to see how it would respond. Some evenings he wouldn't even press the keys at all. He would just run his fingers slowly across them, without pushing down, left to right, right to left, feeling the shape of each one. The wide white keys, the shorter black ones raised above. He seemed to be memorizing something, learning a layout the way some children learn the streets of their neighborhood, quietly, without any fuss. Claire watched this go on for a few weeks before she finally walked into the room one evening and sat down beside him. She asked him if he would like to take lessons. He didn't answer right away. He pressed one more key, listened to it. Then he looked up at her and nodded once, calmly, as if the question had already been settled in his mind long before she asked it. So Claire made a phone call. She reached out to a retired music teacher who lived about 20 minutes away, a patient, experienced woman who had spent decades teaching children of all ages and skill levels. The teacher agreed to come by the following Tuesday afternoon for a first session. She arrived expecting what she always expected from a new student: nerves, stiff fingers, a child who could barely find middle C. What she found instead was something she would talk about for years afterward. But that is a story for the next part. Her name was Mrs. Forsythe. She had been teaching piano for over 30 years. She had taught children who cried at their first lesson, children who begged their parents to let them quit, children who showed up every week with zero practice done and a guilty look on their face. She had also, over the course of those 3 decades, taught a small handful of children who genuinely had something, a natural ear, a quiet instinct for music that couldn't be explained by hard work alone. She knew the difference. She had learned to spot it early. So when she pulled up to the house that Tuesday afternoon, she was relaxed, friendly, completely prepared for the usual first session. Find out what the child knows, explain a few basics, introduce the notes, and leave them with a simple exercise to practice for the week. Nothing complicated, nothing dramatic, just a beginning. She knocked on the door. Claire answered and welcomed her inside warmly. Mrs. Forsythe stepped into the living room, looked over at the old upright piano against the wall, and gave a small approving nod. It wasn't a fancy instrument, but it was decent enough. She had taught on worse. Then she saw Noah. He was already sitting on the piano bench, waiting, hands folded in his lap. Not nervous, not fidgeting, not looking at his shoes the way most young kids do when a stranger walks into the room. He was just sitting there, calm and still, watching her with those big, steady eyes. Mrs. Forsythe smiled at him and pulled a chair close to the bench. She introduced herself. He told her his name. And then she asked him the question she always asked new students at the very beginning. She asked him what he already knew about the piano. Most children say nothing, or they shrug, or they point to a key they recognize and say, "That one is C, I think." Noah reached out and placed both hands on the keys. And he played a scale, a clean, smooth, correct major scale, up and down, without hesitating once. Mrs. Forsythe blinked. She asked him who taught him that. He said nobody. He said he had just been listening. She didn't quite know what to do with that answer, so she moved on. She decided to test him a little, the way she sometimes did with students who surprised her early. She played a short, simple sequence of 4 notes with her right hand. And she lifted her hands and looked at him. Without a word, Noah played it back, perfectly. She played 5 notes. He played them back. She played a slightly more complex pattern, one that moved across different parts of the keyboard. He watched her hands for a moment, then repeated it without a single mistake. By this point, Mrs. Forsythe had stopped treating it like a normal first lesson. She leaned forward in her chair. Her expression had changed. She wasn't smiling in that polite, encouraging way that teachers smile at beginners. She was genuinely focused now. The way a person looks when they realize something unexpected is happening right in front of them. She asked Noah if he had ever heard the word pitch before. He shook his head. She explained it briefly, that every key on the piano makes a sound at a different pitch, some higher, some lower. He nodded as if she was confirming something he had already figured out on his own. She played a single note, without letting him see which key she pressed. Then she asked him to find it. He found it on the first try. She did it again. And again. Different keys, different parts of the keyboard. Every single time, Noah found the note. Not after searching around. Not after a few wrong guesses. He went straight to it, the way you go straight to a light switch in a room you've outlived in her whole life. Mrs. Forsythe sat back in her chair. She had heard of perfect pitch, the rare ability some people are born with to identify and reproduce any musical note without a reference point. In her 30 years of teaching, she had come across maybe 2 or 3 students who showed signs of it. It was not common. It was not something you could teach. It was simply something a person either had or didn't have. She was looking at a child who had it. The session ran long that afternoon. What was supposed to be a 45-minute introduction stretched to almost 2 hours, and neither of them seemed to notice. Claire stood in the doorway at one point, watching, not wanting to interrupt. She saw Mrs. Forsythe playing something and Noah repeating it. She saw her son, the small hands moving across keys. She had never seen him play with any real confidence before. She saw the look on the teacher's face, not the look of a professional going through the motions, but the look of someone genuinely surprised. Claire quietly stepped back into the hallway and said nothing. When Mrs. Forsythe finally stood up to leave, she took a moment in the doorway to speak with Claire privately. She kept her voice low, measured, careful, the way people speak when they are trying not to make something bigger than it is, even when everything inside them is saying that it is, in fact, very big. She told Claire that Noah had something she hadn't seen in a very long time. She said he wasn't a typical beginner. She said the way he listened, really listened, was different from other children. Most kids hear music as a wall of sound. Noah, she said, seemed to hear every individual piece of it, the way you might look at a mosaic and see not just the picture, but every single tile. Claire nodded slowly, taking it in. Mrs. Forsythe said she would come back the following week. And the week after that, she said she wanted to see how far this could go. She drove home that evening quieter than usual. Her husband noticed at dinner and asked if everything was all right. She told him she had just met the most unusual student she had ever taught. He asked what was so unusual about him. She thought about it for a moment. Then she said, "He doesn't just play the notes. He hears them before he plays them. Like he already knows what the music is supposed to sound like. He is just finding his way there." Her husband nodded politely and passed the bread. But Mrs. Forsythe barely touched her food that night. Her mind was still back in that living room, sitting beside a quiet 8-year-old boy and a dusty old piano, wondering, in a way she hadn't wondered in years, what was about to happen next. 6 weeks went by. 6 weeks of Tuesday afternoons. 6 weeks of Mrs. Forsythe arriving at the house with her folder of sheet music and leaving. 2 hours later, looking just a little more amazed than the time before. 6 weeks of Noah sitting on that bench, absorbing everything, not like a student memorizing information, but like someone who was being reminded of things he had somehow already known. The progress was not normal. Even Mrs. Forsythe, who had seen gifted students before, would admit that quietly. Most children at 6 weeks can play a simple beginner song with some stumbling, some repeated notes, and a fair amount of stopping and starting. Noah, at 6 weeks, was playing pieces that most children take a year to reach, not perfectly, not without effort, but with a feeling in the music that technique alone cannot produce. There was something in the way he played that made you stop what you were doing, something that made you want to listen. Claire noticed it every single day. She would be folding laundry or washing dishes, and she would hear something come from the living room, and her hands would just stop. She wasn't analyzing it. She wasn't thinking about scales or timing or any of the technical things Mrs. Forsythe talked about. She was just feeling it. The way you feel a breeze before you actually see the curtains move. And then the letter came home from school. It was a simple notice, printed on yellow paper, tucked into Noah's backpack with a permission slip attached. The school's annual winter showcase was coming up in 3 weeks. Students were invited to sign up and perform a poem, a short skit, a dance, whatever they liked. The event was held in the school gymnasium on a Friday evening. Parents were welcome. Refreshments would be served. Claire read it at the kitchen table. She almost set it aside. Then she looked up and saw Noah in the next room, sitting at the piano, one hand moving slowly across the keys. She walked over and showed him the flyer. She asked him if he wanted to perform. He read it, thought about it for a moment. Then he said yes, just like that. No excitement, no hesitation, no big reaction. Just yes. The same calm, quiet certainty he seemed to bring to everything connected to the piano. Claire signed the permission slip that evening and called Mrs. Forsythe the next morning. The teacher was quiet for a second on the phone, then said simply, "Good, let's prepare him." The next 3 weeks had a different kind of focus. Mrs. Forsythe chose the piece. It was Beethoven's Für Elise, not an abridged version, not a simplified arrangement made for young learners, but the full original composition. Some people might have considered that a risky choice for an 8-year-old with only 6 weeks of formal training. Mrs. Forsythe did not consider it risky at all. She had heard Noah play. She knew what he was capable of. The only question was whether he could hold it together in front of an audience. That, she told Claire privately, was the part she couldn't predict. The night of the showcase arrived on a cold Friday in December. The gymnasium was set up with rows of folding chairs, facing a small raised stage at one end. A portable keyboard had been placed on the stage for the performances. Parents filed in slowly, shaking off the cold, finding seats, chatting with each other in the way people do at these kinds of events, friendly, a little distracted, not expecting anything extraordinary. This was a school showcase. The bar was endearing, not impressive. People came to clap for their own children and smile politely at everyone else's. Noah's name was near the end of the program. By the time the earlier performances were wrapping up, the room had settled into that comfortable, slightly restless mood of an audience that has been sitting for a while. People were shifting in their seats. A few children were getting bored in the back rows. One father near the side wall was quietly checking his phone. Then Noah walked onto the stage. He was small up there. He was wearing a navy blue sweater that was just slightly too big for him, the sleeves coming down past his wrists. He walked to the keyboard without looking at the audience, pulled out the bench, adjusted it a little, and sat down. He placed his hands in his lap for just a second, not performing nervousness, not doing anything for show, just settling himself, getting quiet on the inside the way he always did before he played. The room was still talking. Then he began. The opening notes of Für Elise are gentle, delicate. They don't demand your attention the way a loud piece would. They ask for it quietly, the way someone might touch your arm to get you turned around. And something in the way Noah played those first few notes, the evenness, the softness, the absolute certainty of each one, made the conversations in the room slow down without anyone deciding to stop them. By the fourth measure, the gymnasium was silent. Not politely silent, not the silence of people trying to be respectful. The deep, unplanned silence of people who have been caught off guard by something beautiful. Parents who had been leaning over to whisper to each other straightened up. The father on his phone lowered it without noticing he had done it. Children in the back rows stopped fidgeting. Everyone was listening. Noah played the full piece, every section, every transition. His small hands moved across the keys with a steadiness that didn't look like an 8-year-old performing at a school event. It looked like someone who had been living inside that music for a long time and was finally letting other people hear it. When the last note faded and his hands came to rest in his lap, there was a single moment of complete stillness in the room. Then the gymnasium erupted. People were on their feet. Some of them were clapping so hard their hands had gone red. A woman 2 rows from the front had tears running down her face and wasn't trying to hide them. Someone near the back let out a long breath and said, to no one in particular, "How old is that kid?" Mrs. Forsythe was seated in the very last row. Both of her hands were pressed over her mouth. And Claire, sitting in the 3rd row with Thomas and Lily on either side of her, was completely still, not out of shock, but out of something much quieter, something that felt less like surprise and more like recognition. Like a part of her had always known this moment was coming. She just hadn't known what it would look like when it finally arrived. She looked at her son on that small stage, hands in his lap, the room roaring around him, his face perfectly calm. And she smiled. Nobody planned for what happened next. That is the thing about moments like these. Nobody sat down and decided to make it big. Nobody ran a campaign or sent out press releases or tried to turn one child's school performance into something the whole world would see. It started the way most unexpected things start, with one ordinary person doing one small, thoughtless act. In this case, it was a parent in the 3rd row who had pulled out his phone about 30 seconds into Noah's performance, not to check messages, but because something told him to record it. He wasn't even sure why. He just felt like he should. The video was 47 seconds of shaky footage at the start, the camera still finding its angle, the room noise still present in the background. Then it steadied, and for the remaining 3 minutes, it captured something that no amount of description can fully do justice to. A small boy in an oversized navy sweater, sitting at a keyboard in a school gymnasium, playing Fur Elise with the kind of quiet confidence that makes you forget everything else. A parent who filmed it posted it that same night. He shared it on his personal social media with a short caption. Something simple. Something like, "You have to see this kid." He didn't tag anyone famous. He didn't use any particular hashtag strategy. He just posted it and went to bed. By the time he woke up the next morning, it had been shared over 4,000 times. By noon, it was past 500,000 views. By the end of that Saturday, the number had crossed 2 million. Claire found out the way most parents find out about things involving their children and the internet. Someone else told her. A neighbor sent her a message with a link and a string of exclamation marks. Claire clicked it, watched the video, and sat very still for a long moment. Then she called Daniel into the room and showed him. He watched it without saying anything. Then he watched it again. Neither of them had any idea what to do. The comments beneath the video were overwhelming. Not in a negative way. In the way that a flood is overwhelming. There was just so much of it, coming so fast, from so many directions at once. People from different countries were writing in different languages. Professional musicians were leaving long, detailed comments about Noah's technique and his natural sense of timing. Piano teachers were sharing the video with their own students and telling them to watch it. Parents were tagging their children. Children were tagging their friends. Strangers were writing things like, "I have watched this 11 times and I still get chills. And I do an even like classical music, and I cannot stop crying." One comment, buried somewhere in the middle of thousands, said simply, "This child hears music differently than the rest of us." And somehow, that one line got more likes than almost anything else. The phone calls started by Sunday morning. A local news station reached out first, asking if the family would be willing to do a short interview. Then a regional newspaper. Then a radio station 2 towns over. Claire handled all of it carefully, the way a mother handles something fragile. She was warm but protective. She said yes to some things and no to others. She was not going to let the attention turn into something that made Noah uncomfortable. He was 8 years old. He was not a product. He was her son. She asked Noah how he felt about all of it. He was sitting at the piano when she asked, as he often was. He thought about the question for a moment, pressing one quiet key while he considered it. Then he said he didn't really mind, as long as he still got to practice. Claire laughed. She couldn't help it. That was Noah, right in the middle of the biggest week of his young life, and the thing he was most concerned about was getting his practice time in. The news interview aired on Tuesday evening. It was short, maybe 4 minutes on a local broadcast. They showed a clip of the video, then cut to Noah sitting at the piano at home, playing a few notes while the reporter asked him questions. He answered simply and honestly, without performing for the camera. When the reporter asked him how it felt to have so many people watching his video, he shrugged in that easy way of his and said he hadn't really thought about it too much. The reporter smiled and asked him what he did think about. Noah looked at the piano for a second. Then he said, "I think about the music, like how each note has its own feeling. I just try to get the feelings right." That clip was shared almost as widely as the original video. And then, about a week after the showcase, a letter arrived. Not a phone call this time, an actual formal letter, printed on thick paper with an official letterhead. It was from a regional music conservatory, about 40 minutes from the family's home, one of the most respected music schools in that part of the country. The letter had clearly been written by someone who had watched Noah's video carefully and done a little research before reaching out. It offered Noah a full scholarship, not a partial grant, not a conditional placement. A full scholarship covering tuition, materials, and instrument access for as long as Noah chose to continue his studies there. The letter said they had seen something in his performance that they believed deserved serious, professional nurturing. They were not offering it lightly. They had been discussing it internally since the video first appeared. They were certain. Claire read the letter 3 times at the kitchen table. Then she folded it carefully, set it down, and went to the living room doorway. Noah was at the piano, as usual, working through something slow and quiet that she didn't recognize. His back was to her. His head was tilted slightly to the left, the way it always was when he was listening hard. She watched him for a long moment without saying anything. Then she thought about that dusty, forgotten instrument that had defeated the whole family. The one nobody wanted to touch. The one that had just, somehow, opened a door that none of them had even seen coming. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, and she went to put the kettle on. Some stories end with a big moment, a trophy, a standing ovation, a number on a screen that keeps climbing, something loud and bright that you can point to and say, that is where everything changed. Noah's story had those moments. But the part that stayed with the people closest to him, the part that Claire would come back to again and again in the years that followed, was not the viral video or the scholarship letter or the 4-minute news segment. It was something much quieter than any of that. Something that happened on an ordinary weekday morning about 3 weeks after the showcase, when the noise had settled and the phone had stopped ringing quite so much and life had begun finding its way back to something resembling normal. She had come downstairs early that morning before anyone else was up. The house was still. The winter light was coming through the kitchen window in that pale, thin way it does in December. She put the kettle on and stood at the counter waiting for it to boil. And then she heard it. Noah was at the piano, not playing anything she recognized, not running through a piece Mrs. Forsythe had assigned him, just playing slowly, quietly, something that seemed to be coming from inside him rather than from any sheet of music. A simple melody that moved in a way that felt both unfinished and completely whole at the same time. She stood in the kitchen and listened without moving. The kettle began to steam behind her. She didn't reach for it. She just listened. And in that moment, standing in her kitchen in the early morning quiet, Claire understood something she hadn't been able to put into words before. The piano had never been a challenge. Not really. Not for Noah. It had only ever been a challenge for the people who approached it, thinking about how hard it was. Noah had never thought about how hard it was. He had only ever thought about how it sounded. That difference, small as it seems, turned out to be everything. The conservatory welcomed Noah in the new year. His first day, there was a Tuesday, which felt right somehow, given that Tuesdays had always been his lesson days with Mrs. Forsythe. Claire drove him there in the morning, the two of them quiet in the car, the way they often were together, comfortable with the silence. When they arrived and walked inside, Noah looked around at the high ceilings and the practice rooms lining the hallway and the sound of distant instruments drifting through the walls, and something in his face opened up in a way that Claire had never quite seen before. Not excitement, exactly. More like relief. Like he had just walked into a place that had been waiting for him. Mrs. Forsythe had agreed to continue as his primary teacher, now working within the conservatory structure rather than on Tuesday afternoons in the living room. She said she wouldn't have handed him off to anyone else. Not yet. Maybe not for a long time. He was still her student. She felt a responsibility to him that went beyond professional pride. She simply cared about how this turned out. The other instructors at the conservatory were careful with Noah at first. They had seen the video, of course. Everyone had, and there is always a certain caution that comes with a child who arrives carrying that kind of attention. They wanted to make sure the reality matched what the screen had shown. They didn't want to overpromise anything to themselves or to his family. Within a month, that caution was gone. One of the senior instructors, a man who had spent 20 years teaching advanced students and was not someone who handed out compliments lightly, stopped Mrs. Forsythe in the hallway one afternoon after observing one of Noah's sessions. He told her that in 2 decades of teaching, he had encountered genuine talent perhaps a dozen times. He said what Noah had was something beyond that. He said the boy didn't just play music well. He said it was as if the music trusted him. Mrs. Forsythe nodded. She already knew. Back at home, things had shifted in ways that were hard to explain but easy to feel. Thomas, Noah's older brother, had started sitting in the living room while Noah practiced in the evenings. Not saying anything, not making it into a big deal, just sitting nearby with a book or his phone, staying in the same room in a way he never had before. Lily had asked Claire, quietly one afternoon, if she thought it was too late for her to try the piano again. Not because she thought she had what Noah had. She was clear about that. She just said she missed the feeling of trying. Claire told her it was absolutely not too late. Lily started lessons the following month. Daniel, quiet, practical Daniel, who had always tapped a few keys and walked away, began doing something different in the evenings. He would come home from work, change out of his work clothes, and sit in the armchair closest to the piano while Noah played. He didn't say much. He just sat there. Sometimes he closed his eyes, and the look on his face during those moments was something Claire noticed every time, something she never commented on because it didn't need any words. He looked at peace. The piano that had collected dust for 3 years had not changed. It was still the same second-hand instrument, with the slightly yellowed keys and the one pedal that squeaked a little when you pressed it. Nobody had replaced it or upgraded it or had it professionally refinished. It sat in the same corner, against the same wall, under the same afternoon light. But the room it sat in felt completely different now. It felt lived in. It felt like the center of something. Like that corner of the living room had quietly become the most important place in the house, and everyone in the family had found their own way of being near it, drawn in, one, by a sound they hadn't known they were missing, until an 8-year-old boy sat down one evening and started pressing keys, one at a time, just to hear what they had to say. Nobody had given him permission to fall in love with it. Nobody had pushed him toward it or signed him up or told him it would be worth it. He had simply sat down beside something the rest of the world had walked past. He had been quiet enough to hear it, patient enough to stay. And that, in the end, was the whole story. Not the video, not the scholarship, not the standing ovation in a school gymnasium on a cold Friday night in December. Just a boy, and a piano, and the willingness to listen.